Welcome to Coyote's Moon Fright, a new series I'm starting on this channel. Today is March 19th of 2024, and on Moon Fright, what I want to do is narrate some spooky, scary stories, ghost stories, talk about the paranormal and the uncanny. On Moon Fright, I will be narrating stories that I read online from various cities throughout the entire world and even those rural counties. But first, I want to tell you a story, a true story of what happened to me back 10 years ago. So that's going to be 2014, and it was actually around this time in March. So, during March of 2014, I myself was in the northern tier of the United States. I was in North Dakota. And those of you who have lived in North Dakota, you will know that wintertime lasts a majority of the year and spring is non-existent. The summer lasts about a month and fall is about 24 hours long. And then boom, you're right back into winter. To kick off this story, what I was doing in North Dakota was I was serving in the military. And at this time, I was working the night shift. So, me and my partner that I was working with on shift had to go out to a specific location to do some specific tasks. Now, as we got into our up-armored Humvee and we made it to the location, we turned off the Humvee. This was very common to turn off the Humvee. We did this all the time because Humvees are very loud. You could hardly hear yourself think. So once we got to our location, we turned it off and we could easily talk to one another. Very good for communication and just being able to hear your own thoughts. Well, as we were standing by, inevitably, we were checking our surroundings. Now, this was anywhere between 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., so it was nearly pitch black outside. You could only make out some of the silhouettes of the bushes and the power lines, and there was a blanket of snow on the ground. This was in March, so it wasn't the coldest, but it was very, very cold. It had to be, if it wasn't in the negatives, then it had to be within 10 degrees Fahrenheit. It certainly wasn't barbecue weather. The closest houses were about 2 miles away, and the train tracks, which would be the only thing that would make man-made noises, was a half mile away from us. Whenever we would be dispatched to a specific location, we would average about an hour getting to the site, then staying there doing what we needed to do, and then returning back to the facility. That would normally take around an hour. Well, me and my partner, we're standing by for about 30 minutes. And in the dead of night, we heard something eerie. It sounded as if there were native drums being played out in the distance. The drum beats were similar in sound to the movie Jumanji with Robin Williams. It wasn't as if they were sounding like they were getting closer and closer. They weren't getting louder for us, but rather it sounded as if they were wavering out in the distance, but still remaining consistent with the beat. And it was incredibly freaky. Me and my partner both looked at each other and acknowledged that we were hearing the exact same thing. Shortly after, my partner turned on the Humvee and the headlamps came on, and I think this was our way to just really confirm that there was nothing in front of us, and thankfully nobody was standing in front of us. But boy, I tell you, since I was sitting in the passenger seat, I looked at the side mirror, and what I saw were the tail lamps illuminating the snow-covered ground. We were on a dirt road, but it was all covered in snow. And I saw some snowflakes falling down behind us, and the exhaust billowing out into the air. And thankfully, I didn't see anyone behind us. Man, if I did, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, of course, we all have our methods on how we would communicate to somebody that just walked up on us as we were sitting in our Humvee. We all have our procedures to ascertain what somebody wants, but given that situation at that time, it's enough to freak you out a bit. Of course, it doesn't help that the tail lamps illuminate everything in red, so it would have looked even more creepy if somebody was standing there. And given the distant drum beats, boy, it would have been an ominous place to be. So, me and my partner, as we turn on the Humvee, we decide to do a U-turn. And we were very careful to not put this Humvee into the ditch. The top-heavy Humvees that are up-armored, they could find themselves in the ditch pretty easily, so we had to be very, very careful. And we called it in that we were returning back to the facility. And so we started driving back. When we got back into the facility, we must have told one of the guys that we worked with what we heard, but we certainly did not go back out there and try to dig deeper to figure out where these drum beats were coming from. I guess maybe it could have been a distant train that was coming by, but typically you know that a train is on its way and it has a specific sound to it. It was just these drum beats were too different of a noise. It didn't sound anything like a train. And the rest of the shift went on just normally. We didn't go back out there, and that was it. Now, I've remembered this situation 10 years now. I've thought about it from time and again. I still don't know where those drum beats came from. If somebody was rocking out in their house and blasting their stereo, opening all the windows, okay, great. I'm happy for them. It sounds like they had a fun night, but I don't think that was the case. What do you think it was? Let me know in the comments section below. And speaking of trains, I want to narrate to you all a legendary ghost story that takes place in San Antonio, Texas. It involves train tracks and a train. Before we get to that story, however, I'd like to hear from you all an encounter that you've had. Perhaps it was an encounter that you believe you saw a ghost or some kind of object that was from out of this world, something you couldn't explain perhaps, or something just unsettling. The human mind is an interesting place, isn't it? I think we can really freak ourselves out if we try searching for a pattern that could lead us to a conclusion that may be unsettling. I mean, we still don't know exactly why we dream. We have ideas, but there are plenty of mysteries to the human psyche, and that is quite all right. Now, the reason why I would like for you all to specifically comment stories that either happened to you or that you've heard from other people is because not only I, but other viewers can scroll through the comment section and read these stories. When they read these stories, they're able to place themselves in the story, as opposed to somebody sending me a story, an encounter that they've had to my YouTube email. I would rather it be right in front of other people so they can read it from there. And your story may be narrated by me in the next episode of Moon Fright. We're going to have a lot of fun on this here, folks. So, let's go ahead and travel to San Antone. This story is named The legend of the haunted railroad tracks. This happened in the late 30s. On an especially dark evening, a nun was driving a school bus filled with children home after a field trip. They were heading down Shane Road, but when approaching the railroad crossing, the bus abruptly stalled on the tracks. Most of the students were sleeping, so the nun was quietly attempting to start the engine. It was then that a train emerged, seemingly out of nowhere, as its headlamp was burnt out, and it offered no warning of its impending arrival. It was too late to evacuate the children, as the train was moving too fast and the nun was desperately and frantically trying to turn the ignition. The bus was rammed by the train, cutting the bus in half. The nun was thrown through the windshield, but amazingly survived. The young children, however, were not as fortunate. A few weeks later, the nun, guilt-ridden and heartbroken, returned to the site of the accident. She was unable to continue on with life and decided to end her life right there. She parked her car on the tracks and sat there waiting for the next train to come along. Hours passed by, and when a train came into sight, speeding down toward her in the same way as the tragic night, the nun began to hear small, familiar voices. Then her car began to move forward, as if it was being pushed from behind. The nun's car was rolled to safety, just as the train roared by. In disbelief, the nun got out of her car and began looking around, expecting to find a good Samaritan. But she saw not a single soul. She looked back at her car, and she noticed children-sized handprints on the back of her trunk. It was then she realized that the ghosts of her students had saved her life. The nun was then blessed with a newfound purpose in life. She later opened a school for orphans. She taught there till the day she died. Now, it is said that to this day, if anyone parks their car on or near the railroad tracks at Shane Road, ghostly children will push the vehicle to safety, as they are determined to make sure that no one meets the same gruesome fate that they suffered. This legend has grown so much over the years that tourists travel from all over the country so that they can bear witness to this phenomenon at the railroad crossing on Shane Road. Some will even sprinkle baby powder on the back end of their car so that they can more easily spot the handprints after their vehicle is pushed off the tracks. Oh, man. You know, I don't believe that ghost children will push your car off the railroad tracks, but I'm certainly not going to go there and find out. I'm definitely not sprinkling baby powder over the trunk of my car just to see little kids' handprints. Because I don't want to find out. Well, that concludes this episode of Moon Fright, the first episode of Moon Fright, that is. I'd love to hear some stories from you. You can read up where I found this story, which is on ghostcitytours.com. I'll leave it in the description of this video. I'll leave a link down there. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I look forward to reading your stories in the comments section below, and I may just narrate them in the next episode of Moon Fright.
KYOT Coyote.